Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, my name is Sharon and I'm a trainee clinical psychologist, and in today's video I'm going to be reflecting on my first ever placement. So let's get into it. Now, my first placement was in an adult community mental health team, and I think at the beginning of my placement I said that I was kind of going to be in a split post between the community mental health team and then also the early intervention psychosis team, which was what my supervisor had in mind first. But I think just because of like the level that I was at and also the range of people that I did get to see in the CMHT, I was mainly based in the community mental health team. So just to clear that confusion up a little bit, because I know I got a bit confused. So first I'm going to be going into kind of what my day-to-day looked like and the tasks that I was involved with and the kind of client work that I was doing, including the models that I used. And I'm going to go on to talk about the competencies or the skills that I learned during this placement, and then I'm going to finish off with my areas for development for my next / current placement now. So I've actually already started my second placement, and it's just taken me forever to bloody sit down and film this video. I think there was some apprehension around it because I feel like I learned like so much on my first placement, but I'm also aware that I have so much more to learn. I've got some notes on my phone because, you know, it was a 6-month placement, which means a lot of learning. So if I'm looking down, that's why. So for context, an adult community mental health team is situated in between primary and tertiary care. So we are a secondary mental health service in which we're almost like the step between IAPT and the step between hospital admission, which seems like quite a big gap to be filling, which it is. And there are step 4 services that are now coming in which sit between IAPT and community mental health teams, but anyway, that's a different story. But we're there the step before hospital admission, which kind of in the nature of it means that we're supporting people with long and enduring mental health conditions and also people who have quite a lot of risk or complex histories. In terms of my role, I was doing mainly one-to-one therapy cases, and then I was also co-facilitating a trauma stabilisation group, and then I was also helping out with a carers support group. So for carers who are supporting people with a diagnosis of psychosis. So you can see here how my role was still quite related to psychosis. I had a couple of clients with psychosis as well, and so there was definitely that overlap. Now in my one-to-one therapy cases, not much differed in comparison to what I was doing as an AP. So I was doing the assessment with the person, and then I would do the formulation with them, and then I would work on an intervention. Now the difference between being an AP and a trainee is that as a trainee you kind of have more, I guess, independence. You're expected to take the lead a little bit more, and at the beginning of my placement it wasn't like that at all. Like, I was definitely being led by my supervisor, but then towards the end of it I was feeling a bit more confident in my ability to formulate using the cognitive behavioural model and able to kind of propose what intervention I might use, and then my supervisor and I would kind of collaboratively come up with a plan. I would also have to present my assessments in the psychology meeting, which is where we kind of all decide what intervention would be best suited for that person. That was a new kind of way of working for me because I was never really part of a big psychology team in my previous assistant psychologist role, so that was really interesting. Other than my one-to-one therapy cases, I would also be doing, like I said, the trauma stabilisation group and then the carers support group. So with the trauma stabilisation group, this was a 12-week program where we would explore the impact of trauma on people and their mental health, and then go on to suggest some trauma stabilisation skills. Now I'm not going to go into that in this video because I don't know how confident I feel yet in sharing psychological knowledge online, just because of my kind of like trainee status, but maybe in the future I will do if you guys are interested. But I really enjoyed being part of the group, and that was kind of one of my main learning objectives or aims for this placement, for my first placement, was to be more involved in groups. And actually by the end of it I was kind of taking more of a lead, and I was also helping produce some of the content for the slides, which was really good. For the other group that I was co-facilitating, that didn't actually go ahead in terms of a group format. So we thought we had quite a few people interested in a group for people who are supporting people with the diagnosis of psychosis. But people were busy, people had work commitments, so in the end I just ended up doing it as a one-to-one kind of psychoeducational session with an individual, which again was beneficial, and I did get to kind of create all of the resources for the group, so that was a really good experience for me. One of the main things that I learned in this placement was just how much trauma is responsible or plays a role in people's experience of mental health conditions. Pretty much every client, I think it was every client that I worked with, had experienced some kind of trauma, whether that be a single event of trauma or more complex trauma where it's multiple events. Pretty much everyone. And I guess that gave me a better understanding of why we're moving more towards the kind of power threat meaning framework rather than diagnoses led work, and trauma informed ways of working. And you know, that term gets thrown around a lot, but I can see now why we're doing that. I like how we're moving away from, you know, like, what's wrong with you, like, why do you have what some people call EUPD, or why do you have bipolar, you know? It's more about like what happened to you and why have these symptoms, or why is your presentation like this, like what was it helping you to cope with. And I really saw that in this placement, and I learned so many skills in order to manage presentations of trauma through the trauma stabilization group, and also being able to sit with that horrible reality that people have been through some really crap stuff and be able to assess that in a sensitive way, which can be quite difficult, and also knowing how to manage and like contain my own emotional state, because yes, it was very emotional at times, but I think that was like my biggest take-home message from that placement, was just how much trauma there is in the mental health system, and also to be mindful not to re-traumatize people, and be mindful of that especially in the assessment phase, because people have told and retold their stories again and again by the point of seeing you. So one thing that I'm quite proud of myself, and I really do have to thank my supervisor for this, but it's just how much more confident I feel in formulating, and that's a big part of our role, right? It's making sense of why the person is presented to services and why they're experiencing the distress that they're experiencing. And I was able to get to a point where I was like fully drawing out a formulation with a client in a session and doing it really collaboratively, and I just remember thinking like, this is so fun to me, and like I can't believe how far I've come, where I've been able to, you know, use things from the assessment and discuss them with the client and say, like, where do you think this fits, and like, how do you think this connects with that? And really, I think what was amazing about this placement was that actually it wasn't me like drawing this formulation out in my own time and saying, okay, look, this is how I've made sense of it. No, it was really done collaboratively, and I think it was just like, it sounds so nerdy to say, but it was just such a thrill, the fact that I was able to do this amazing thing and make sense of someone's problem with them. And yeah, I can't wait to keep on building up on that skill and adding like different models to my toolkit, because I was mainly working within the CBT remit, which I'm happy with for now, and then I was also drawing upon different models, which I'm going to get into you know, now actually, why not? So in this placement I got a chance to practice that integrative way of working, which is something I really want to be, a psychologist who is able to fit the client and not the other way around. And so I think it's really important to be able to draw upon different models and work in an integrated way. And so I was mainly using CBT, which, you know, to be expected from a first year trainee. And actually I went in like not really liking CBT that much, because I was from the camp of, you know, it's like, it doesn't really suit everyone. It's very like one size fits all. It's very like structured, but actually it depends on the therapist you are, and some would argue this is completely wrong, but this is what worked for me and my clients. But while we mainly followed the CBT model, we did draw from other models. I did use ACT, and actually from a theoretical standpoint you can do that, because ACT is an offshoot of CBT. And so yeah, being able to work flexibly in that way was again like really exciting for me, and it reminded me of why I want to be a clinical psychologist. And it's the fact that we can do that. We can draw from different models, and I just think like, if I didn't have ACT or even compassion focused therapy to draw from, I wouldn't have been able to do half the work I did with some of my clients. CBT wouldn't have been enough. and some people again may argue with that. So with the CFT, I was using things like self-soothe box and exploring the 3 systems with an individual, and then also drawing on ACT and thinking about people's values. And I think values are so important when setting goals, so I think with any kind of therapy I'll be using ACT-based stuff because of that. But yeah, again, that ability and that way that I was able to flex and practice integrative working in this placement was just so invaluable to me, and it really just, it gave me confidence in myself as a clinician that I've never really had before. Letter writing. Now, I feel like I've spoken about this in every frickin' reflective video that I've ever made. I feel like I find it quite hard to be concise sometimes, and I guess everyone has their own style of writing letters, so whenever I move around different supervisors, they all kind of want it in a different way. In this setting, I think I learnt more of a standardised way of writing up assessment reports, which again I really appreciated because I do like a structure, and if it's helpful, maybe in a future video I could go through that structure. But yeah, I remember at the beginning of this placement, my supervisor would have to send like so many copies back to me being like, oh yeah, you need to move this bit around, or like you don't need to include this bit, or like you forgot this bit, or maybe you could reword this, and actually by the end of it I was barely getting any changes sent back to me, which is I guess a good sign. And then another thing that was brought up during my letter writing was my use of kind of the narrative style of writing, and I guess this is kind of down to people's preferences, but then something that my supervisor did point out is when you say something like the low mood or the anxiety, for some people it might kind of minimize their experience, and actually I know some people do like having a diagnosis of depression, so saying like, you know, when you're depressed, can feel like it has more weight and it can feel more, I guess, validating for them, which I understand. And I think what that taught me is that I can't just have my own language and say, you know, I think that it's really good to externalize the problem from the individual and highlight how it's a state and not their way of being. But actually, I now think that's not right. Actually, I think it's more important to ask the client like what language they want to use and then use that in your letters, which is something that I always thought I did, but actually I wasn't by externalizing the language. Some people do like the diagnosis of depression or anxiety, whatever diagnosis they have. And that was another thing actually that I learned in this placement, was this use of, you know, some people really want a diagnosis. I had one client who was really fighting for a diagnosis of what some may call EUPD, or emotionally unstable personality disorder. But I think that diagnosis is so problematic, but then, you know, that's not my place to say. It's definitely down to the client and what language they want to use to describe their own experience. I think, again, one massive like revelation was that even when I thought that I was trying to act in a very compassionate way by externalizing the problem and not using diagnoses, that's me, that's what I prefer, that's not what my client prefers. And so it's really important to give that choice to the client and say like, how would you describe this, what would you prefer? And a massive thing that I learned in this placement was that I can be myself and be a great psychologist. And my supervisor in my placement was incredible at bringing herself into the therapy room, and I saw how much warmth that brought and how it made clients relax and how it helped with the rapport and engagement and having that human side while being completely professional is so important. One of my comments from the first or second time that my supervisor observed me was that I was coming across cold, and I mean, I'm just not like that. But because of this like idea of what I thought a clinical psychologist should look like, I wasn't being myself at all. My personal tutor then pointed out and said, oh, maybe it's just, you know, the way that you've had to learn how to act in a field that is predominantly white, which made me reflect on loads of things, because I was like, I wasn't even aware I was doing it, and like, why would whiteness mean like not being warm, and you know, all of these things, and it just made me question a lot. But actually I think because in my mind still, I'm trying to move more away from it, but for me a clinical psychologist is this person who is from a white middle class background, who probably wears like very smart clothes and speaks really fancy language, and who ultimately isn't like me at all. And so I was trying to mould myself into that, and that's not me, and so I was coming across cold, essentially. Yeah, so seeing my supervisor just be themselves and bring that to the therapy was like incredible and so empowering to me. And I remember them saying that you'll go through training and you'll pick bits from different supervisors that you like and don't like, and you'll base your version of a psychologist on that. And another thing that I learned in this placement was my ability to have really difficult conversations that may potentially spoil or rupture the therapeutic alliance, and like navigating that and repairing the relationship. And I was quite shocked at how, I don't want to come across big-headed, but how well I did it. There were multiple occasions where I'd go into conversations being like, I don't know if I can do it. My supervisor was like, do you want me to do it? And I was like, no, I need to do it. I just need to try and learn and do it, basically. Most of the time, it was all right. Therapeutic relationship was maintained and actually made even better after that rupture or bumpy time. But yeah, that was another thing. Again, it really kind of surprised me at how well I did with that. So moving on to like my areas for development and what I hope to gain from my next placement. So the placement I'm currently in now is an older adults service, and so I'm partly working on the inpatient unit, and then I'm also doing some memory assessments, and then I'm also doing some work in the community where I'm doing therapy with people who have got a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. So that's my current placement, if you guys aren't aware. If you don't follow me on Instagram though, go follow me on Instagram, because that's where I keep more like real-time updates, because YouTube is very hard for me to keep up with. So my Instagram is Sharon B Psych. So in this older adults placement, I want to continue with all of the skills that I've learned in my first placement, but I just want to build upon it and obviously do it in the scope of older adults. So within formulation, use a formulation like Laidlaw's older adults CBT model. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's Laidlaw, and it's a CBT model that includes things that are more relevant to older adults. And so I want to get used to using formulations like that and still doing them collaboratively, and growing in confidence to do that. But more specifically, I want to try and be like more present and I guess more like vocal in MDTs. I think in previous roles, and I think that's down to me not feeling as confident, I've kind of just like let my supervisor do the talking, and then if they're like, oh, like, do you want to add anything, I'm just like, no, I think you covered it all. And actually sometimes they haven't, and so I need to be able to speak up in those settings, and I need to start doing that now. And actually, to be fair, in my current placement, I feel like I am getting a bit better at that. And I guess a big one is I want to have more confidence in my own kind of clinical judgment, and so I want to do more things independently. And maybe this won't come now, but it is just something that I'm working towards constantly. I also want to keep doing service development stuff, so either kind of helping out with starting up a new group, kind of thinking in an innovative way. Again, I don't know if I'll be able to do that in this placement because I am still early on in my training journey. And then something I didn't do in my last placement but I probably should do a bit of in this one is teaching, and so that might be teaching to ward staff or other people part of the MDT. I've still got loads to grow on, and like I don't think I'll ever come away from a placement and be like, yep, I'm done, like I'm finished learning. That will not be the case. So I just want to continue to build on stuff that I've already learned in my first placement, as well as try out some new things like leadership stuff and service development, and maybe even like audit within a service. I don't know. But yeah, that's it for today. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe for more content like this. And until next time, guys, I will see you later. Bye.